Hello and welcome to this episode of Dynamics Update. And with me as usual, I have Gustav. Hello, Gustav.
Hello, Johan.
And something that is a bit different this time is that we actually have a guest. Normally we just discuss features in the release notes, but this time we actually have a guest. We have Paul Heisterkamp. Hello, Paul.
Hello.
Hi, guys.
How are you doing today?
I'm fine. And thank you for having me here on your podcast.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. Exactly.
So, for those of you who don't know you, who are you?
Yeah, I'm Paul. I'm a solution architect from Germany. And I'm an MVP and FastTrack recognized solution architect. And I'm a big OneVersion advocate. And I think we will discuss this topic further today.
yes, exactly. And that was actually sort of my first subject here. When I read your LinkedIn, it says OneVersion Advocate, and I just wanted to, because I sort of feel the same way. And I know that a lot of people in the AX community maybe not always think as OneVersion as something good. It's more of a big hassle. So where do you stand in this discussion?
Yes, some time ago or years ago, I also was not that positive about OneVersion. It was the time when we had to migrate or reimagine our AX 2012 solution to F&O and the whole ecosystem. And after some time, the whole application and so on got sealed, and you had to migrate everything to extension. And once this one was finished and we had a cloud-ready solution, ISV solution, the fun began, let's say. But of course, also the work behind keeping up with the pace of Microsoft also began there.
Yeah, and I think that's where most people get off on the wrong foot. They see this as Microsoft just trying to mess with you and destroy your planning.
Yeah. But in all fairness, I mean, it's a different thing to look at the cloud platform, what it is today with extensibility and the whole seal, and what we can do now leveraging the Power Platform, etc. So I understand exactly what you mean, Paul. It was a struggle, to be honest, and I think Microsoft hadn't, of course, thought everything out as well on their end. So it was a struggle then, but I think it's important now. I share that advocate feeling that now you really need to stress the good points with the cloud solution, because they are mature, I would say, at least mature enough to not mitigate staying on the old. And I think the balance here is that the old legacy or the legacy way of working has so much disadvantages now compared to the more modern workforce and modern platforms. So it's not comparable like 3 years ago what it is today, but it's still same story basically. It's just more mature now. Would you share that opinion?
Yeah, and you are getting a lot of amazing features every a month or two, and they are that much that you are not able to keep up with exploring all of them. But that is, of course, one space your podcast is filling there. But yeah, we went live with one of our customers, I think on platform version 5, and I think now we are almost on 45. Yeah. So it was not fun going into those beta lives.
The old AX7. That's really
the old X7. Yeah, right.
Renier,
but also I think that one of the big things here is that it's such a big concept change from what we were used to on 2012, because I unlike Gustav, I've not worked with Dynamics that long. I've been in the game for like 6 years or so, and I'm coming from the more of the infrastructure side, where we have had Windows Update since 2000 or something like that, which means that we were used to updating things. Basically, everything we had on our computers, we were used to updating every single month anyway. So the first question I had when I came in was, so how do we handle updates? And basically, the answer I got between the lines was, we don't.
Yeah.
We never
So
upgrade because it's a hassle. It doesn't. And I was at my previous company for, I think it was 4 years or so. And during that time, we did a lot of like new projects for 2012, and we did like RFPs and so on. And never one single time was one of the requests, we need to be able to update.
Yeah,
Never.
So even the move from a cumulative update to the next one was the hassle of updating multiplied by 100 in the comparison to F&O currently. So all our last updates ran through extremely smooth, of course, with a lot of testing effort before, but if you test your systems like regression testing, then you're fine to update the production.
Yeah, and isn't that kind of one of the biggest, mental shifts for a lot of organizations as well as technical groups? That shift from having to, when you don't update, you only need to test that little feature that you're actually going live with, right? But now you really need to implement a full organization-wide testing mentality as well, right? I think that, for me at least, that's one of the biggest changes. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. It's an important thing to drive through when you're discussing both for transitioning to cloud and also like getting a new system, or also just making sure you stay stable, right? Paul, what is your the biggest change? I'm not going to say disadvantage, but the biggest change from moving to cloud, from transitioning from on-prem, is that kind of in the same line, or did you see anything else in your experience?
Yeah, in our case, the biggest change was to reinvent all those solutions that previously worked with local files. So bringing that one into, let's say, blob storages or service bus queues, and building up the whole integration and communication with legacy, still existing on-prem systems. I think that was the biggest challenge. And also we had solutions relying on Windows services and bringing them into the cloud with Kubernetes and all this fancy stuff. That was the biggest shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think one of the things before in AX 2012 was that since you had the AIF and you had the ability to integrate through files, I think that was the easiest and simplest solution to use. So that's why you used it. And now all of a sudden that path is almost not even available anymore, because it's really a lot of extra work.
Yeah, and also read-only access to the production database was possible, and this was also cut it away, and you had to rethink all those integrations.
Yeah, and I think that's also one of the points that I was discussing earlier. Now we had BYOD as a kind of a replacement for that solution where you could use Azure SQL, but that's also been struggling a little bit when it comes to, and now we have the Azure Data Lake Storage. We're getting a lot of features added to kind of replace what we had before, but that's been a really big problem for a lot of volume intense companies, I would say, as well, that whole. But in all essence, it's a good thing, because you cannot expect to have this in a so normalized database that we have in Dynamics. But that mental shift, and as you say, making use of tools that maybe the organization isn't used to, at least you need to have some kind of key component like BizTalk or Logic Apps or something that can leverage that access between on-prem and cloud. And it's not always easy, right? I still had a character encoding issue in a customer site Dynamics 365 issue. They're still there. It's still SSIS in the background. It's just where the problem occurs kind of has moved, right? And hopefully less problems than we had before.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and also the need of leveraging automated testing is more there than ever. I'm not talking about RSAT, because in our case we haven't kept up with RSAT so much, but we heavily relying on unit testing and this test frameworks, so coded process tests and even unit tests, and these are our backbone for let's say restructuring things or refactoring, and also testing on newer versions.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's also one of my more technical questions, or not questions, but how to make that work. RSAT is one tool, and RSAT was also provided by Microsoft to kind of, they see the issue here that we need to restructure the way of testing, and RSAT is a good tool, but it also kind of, you need to have at least 2 fully employed people working with your RSAT test cases, basically, and that's really a mental shift as well for a lot of people. You need to have full-time, at least resources or FTEs working to understand your architecture, to understand what you need to test. It's not enough to just build stuff. You need to really make sure that you have it covered. And RSAT is good, but it doesn't cover a full end-to-end perspective. So you still need to have other stuff to do automated testing, right?
Yeah. And for RSAT, in our case, it is always that you need a full featured test manager, so who's able to structure test cases, to modularize test cases. So it is not only the key user or functional consultant that is able to record robust, complex test cases, because it isn't that easy.
No, absolutely. It's a very complex thing, and it's also a very alive thing. And again, boils down to what you mentioned as well, Johan, that before we don't update. Yeah, because then you really need to just, everything you calculate that you build, you need to take that into account. Now you need to update, but you always need to start with the testing, and you need to involve it in the same way. And from my perspective, you get a lot of questions on, won't that be more expensive? But I think if you boil it down and if you do the math and calculate, it's actually cheaper now, because you don't have to spend so much time regression testing or with production outages when you don't test for your updates. So it's hard to say, but I think if you, in the end, it's cheaper to actually do it this way, even if you have to add another resource to maintain your tests, because production stops and like systems instability is a lot more expensive than just adding a few lines of code for testing, I would say. But that's my opinion. I think I'm preaching to the choir here. I think we're all on that level. But it's an important for me that one of the challenges with OneVersion is kind of explaining it, because a lot of people see it as a technical thing. Yeah, you're forced to have updates every month, or you're forced to do this, you're forced to do this. You are, but it's with some flexibility. And the whole point with OneVersion is to gain system stability, right? And to have the same experience across, and to make sure that you don't have to rebuild something, which is like specifically from a legal requirement perspective. You don't have to build everything from scratch to cover SEPA or whatever experience that you have. You can look at how it's done, and it's coming as a standard feature because you can implement it. I did a SEPA project for AX 2009, and it took like 6 months because of all of the customizations they've done before. They had to implement the standard code from Microsoft, and that took longer than just enabling the feature. So I think that's one of my main cases I always bring up when you discuss. But you had to provide legal requirements before as well. Yes, you did, but you had to also implement them, and I think it's more complex in a customized environment than it is in OneVersion.
So one of the things that I heard you mention was unit testing and so on, and I think I mean from my end that's one of the areas where we haven't really been that good at. I am not a developer, so I'm not really working with that part of the stack. But I think also that is one challenge that we're having, is that the people who are developing for Dynamics are used to develop for AX, and we didn't have those kind of development tools for AX. We had the AOT, and now all of a sudden we have the whole Visual Studio set up at our fingers, and we can use it the way the rest of the world's developers is using it.
Almost.
Almost.
But the fun fact here is we already had those unit tests in AX 2012. there it was harder to automate the execution every night, which is now easier. But we heavily rely on that. So we have unit tests, even thousands in every of our ISV solutions, and also on the customer project individual level. And the unit testing stack is growing that much in our project that our developers complaining about too long builds during gated check-in and pull request because of a test execution of 2 hours or something like that, because we have that much tests. So, but that secures a lot. But of course, it is also a big invest.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean that's from an ISV as well. You guys have an ISV that you maintain, but it's important to. I mean, the dream world is maybe not 2 hours of execution of testing, but I get your point. The dream world is to have that as well for all clients and all customer-based installations as well, because as you say, the end goal is not to like have as gated a check-in as possible. The end goal is to have system stability and to prevent issues and to prevent production outages as well. So I think as long as you have a balanced way of seeing it that way, maybe you don't need 2 hours of unit testing or automated executions of tests in a smaller customer environment, but you need to have it in an ISV product because you're maintaining a lot of customer data. So the balance question is always there. But and I remember once being in Seattle with AX2012 and asking the Microsoft technician then, why don't you release your test cases for AX2012 so we can just make use of them? But he had a very good case then, because he said, let's say we have 7 million lines of X++ code in 2012. We maybe have 14 million lines of test cases in test code in our internal. If we release those, are we then responsible for them? So it's more important that you because a test case is applicable for that environment, right? You can build test cases that are applicable for one version that you can reuse, but they are not really good for usage unless you've tested that they are valid for your use case. So it's still always customer specific in that case. So I think you had a very good point.
And my feeling is that those people are always talking about releasing the test cases for standard code, kind of hiding themselves behind the statement to not start their own test implementation. So if you are used to building those tests, it is not that much extra effort, and because of that we have it almost everywhere in our ISV solutions and also on the customer implementation project. So it is worth the effort, and we found a lot of regressions with this tool.
Yeah. A detailed question from specific to ISV. I mean, are you guys, you have issues with using chain of command, right? From an ISV perspective, because of the nature of chain of command, how with ISVs combined with other ISVs and custom code at customers. Is that something that you build test cases to kind of catch, or is it mainly specified for your product? I mean, when you have your test cases, because I would imagine it's impossible to catch everything, right? Specifically when you implement an ISV alongside a different ISV. So if they are using chain of command and you are using chain of command on the same class, is that something that you guys are having challenges with?
Yeah, of course we had those problems because we not only have one ISV, we have I think 10 or 12, and we combine them on the customer needs.
Yeah, of course.
For example, pricing solution is always mandatory, but archiving is not always mandatory, and so on. And then of course you have this situation that you have chain of command in the ISV and chain of command in the customer code in the implementation project. And of course then you have sometimes challenges, but we've built up our ISV or restructured these points in the code that we do not have challenges, but of course those problems happen, and then we implement let's say guard tests on the customer level, because there everything comes together.
Okay, guard test. That's a very good saying. I say okay, thank you. I think that's also one more example of Microsoft providing a solution to an issue, the overlaying issue. A lot of people trying to transition, as well as a lot of cases. I mean, I don't know how many extensibility support tickets are logged nowadays, because now I think it's so mature that you should be able to cope with it. But it's a nice feature to have, but it does have its drawbacks. I was just suspecting that it might be a lot of issues specifically for ISVs.
Yeah, the situation in nowadays is in our case that if we find extensibility issues, we simply fix them ourselves via community-driven engineering, because then we can build it as we need it. And of course, Microsoft has to approve, but this way is brilliant.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
I think the community-driven engineering project really speaks to how Microsoft intends this to work. Because yes. I caught on to the thing you said before, that people often use Microsoft's test cases as an excuse not to implement their own, because they're saying we don't have Microsoft's test cases. And that's one of the points that I've been driving in like sessions and blog posts and so on as well, is that somewhere, and because we went through exactly the same thing on the infrastructure side, we tested every single patch that Microsoft released every single month. That doesn't happen anymore. We sort of rely on the fact that Microsoft most of the time know what they're doing. We need to somehow, I mean, if we're not going to work ourselves to death, we need to trust that the code that Microsoft releases most of the time is fine. We can't use that as an excuse anymore. And that comes to the point that you were saying about the test cases, that I mean, Microsoft can't be an excuse for us not to do our job. We need to do our job as well as possible. Then, of course, I'm not saying that we don't test Microsoft things, but somewhere on the trust chain, we need to understand that Microsoft has no interest in screwing with our code.
No, and I mean it's hard you can't compare testing code towards, and specifically for ERP. It's so complex, right? And now with all the feature management, if you want to trust Microsoft setup, then you need to run a vanilla version with all the features enabled at that same exact version as Microsoft is testing, with kind of the same data as well. Hopefully you're in the US, then you might be quite safe relying on those tests. But who is there, right? No one is running that except for Microsoft's test solutions, right? So it's the feature management and all the different parameters. And I've never seen a vanilla D365 environment, and I don't suspect I will nowhere soon. So I mean, it's all about your specific needs and your specific testing. You can start from that, absolutely. It's good to have a base plate to run with, but they always need to be tailored to your needs, I would say.
But feature management is a good point, because with 10.0.21, I think they have those enabled by default features, and this one crashed at least one feature of one of our ISVs, because with an enabled by default feature, the whole implementation switched from a version 1 interfacing to a version 2 interfacing, and our extension and implementation was on version 1. Of course, there was those warnings about feature deprecation and so on, but we kind of ignored it or didn't saw it, and then we run into problems there. But the good thing there was that you simply can disable this feature, and this switched back everything to version 1.
Yeah, but I think also that is part of Microsoft's problem here, because if the customers doesn't turn on the features, they actually don't see if there are issues with the features.
Exactly.
That's the problem. I mean, one of the ways that they found out if there is issues is that we report errors. That's why I've always been saying that every single issue that you're having, you need to report it, because that's the way. I mean, you might be in a situation where you have a very niche setup, and Microsoft won't be testing your niche setup, but you will, and they still want to fix it. So you need to report it. And the problem is that if everyone leaves all of the features turned off, we will never get to a point where the features actually get high enough quality.
It's kind of the same discussion we had with the sealing of the software, right? But now it's on feature level. At some point, also the way with license, hard license checks will be implemented at some point in time. So you just need to kind of stay on top to catch it. We're trying to raise that in this pod as well. And, please look at what is being deprecated. But sometimes you miss it, of course, and that's just the way it is. But if you have good testing, then at least you don't get a production outage. And like you say, Paul, you can just switch it off for now, at least. That's very good.
We found it in pre-prod, so not in prod, so everything is okay.
But I was just thinking, since you are developing an ISV, which you send to customers, is then your recommendation that you shouldn't turn on this feature, or what kind of demands that Microsoft set on you in order to deliver a product that they can stand behind, so to speak?
In this case, it is that we, for now, tell them to turn it off. But of course, the transition to V2 is in the making, so we are aligning with that. And in our case, it is not always that we deliver ISV solutions to our customer. It is more that we are doing implementation projects by using our ISVs. So we have a very small subset of ISV solution that we sell independently, but the major part is that complex and that consulting needed, that we use them in implementation projects.
Okay, so you are basically using some of your ISVs as your IP instead of starting from a blank page at the customer. You use these as building blocks to build the complete. That's really, really smart. I've not heard anyone doing that before, because partners tend to sort of start from scratch.
No, we are starting everything with our ISV and add-on stack, let's say. And some of our ISV solutions are also on app source, but the major part of our business unit for F&O is doing implementation project based on our ISV solutions, and we are growing our ISV solutions also during projects. So we, as our solution architecture team, identifying requirements that are, let's say, spread over all our customers or needed by other customers, and these developments get added to our ISV solutions, and the others remain in the implementation projects on customer level.
That's really interesting. That's smart. I haven't heard anyone doing that before. Most ISVs are just ISVs. They are selling a product to customers or via partners, but they're not using it as a non-public ISV, so to speak.
No. And I think that's also one of the drivers of the OneVersion. One of the discussions of Evergreen is that it puts a heavy emphasis on the client running the system, that it's their system, and you can have a partner who implements it, but it's not the classic way of building and then just forgetting it and moving away, because you're never going to update anyway, right? So you need to really build the knowledge, and you need to build the competence at the client side together with a partner or an implementation consultant that helps you out, but then leaves the customer in charge of that client, of that installation, basically. And that's if you have ISV's components to help on that journey, that's a very smart thing. I agree. So Paul, what do you see as the greatest challenge, or how do you look on the future of Dynamics 365? What's the biggest thing that's going to change in the next? There is no next version really, but how do you see on the future for Dynamics 365? Whatever we're calling it now, I don't remember anymore.
I'm very interested in the future of the conversions between F&O and the whole Dataverse Power Platform, how this ends, and what I'm also looking forward to, that Microsoft is putting more and more specific processes into Microsoft services, and I'm looking forward to the next one that is popping up sometime. But I think that's the future of the ERP to do non-ERP related operations in a subsystem to scale it out and do not put everything into the ERP.
Super interesting, yeah, and I totally agree. And I think that the whole microservices-oriented architecture was another topic. But I mean, Johan, you've already had it discussing on Dynamics Con. You also had a presentation on the inventory visibility, I think, right? Another microservices architecture. So I think that that specifically is another pet peeve of mine. That inventory visibility app, the whole scaling out, that very, very resource intense on-hand question. I know there was a big issue in retail before with the everything looking at the invent sum table, all of those issues. So I share that opinion with the microservices oriented architecture. It's just nice to see how it's fit to scale out, as you say. Johan, do you have another opinion on the future, or are we in line?
No, I actually think the same, and the inventory visibility add-in also speaks to a point that I've been having since I saw Dynamics for the first time. It's actually that the data within F&O is much more accessible than it used to be in AX. First of all, it's a cloud installation, of course. It is in the cloud, it's available, it's there to be able to be used, but you also use standard protocols to query data, to look at data, to import data, which is not a lot of the things that we did in AX was things that we needed to build ourselves, and we usually built it in a way where it was custom made for the customer that we worked with. We didn't build it according to any standard because we didn't need any standard, because it was just us using it. But that's what I really like, having the standard OData set up, having like the REST APIs. I think that's a really good point here, and the inventory visibility is just another step making new data available as an API instead of having it as a proprietary solution.
And another feature here to mention is the data lake integration, which maybe gets GAs sometimes.
We'll see.
And then I want to see it in a load testing or a real world high pressure scenario, how all those data gets out of the system, and not synchronizing the data via bring your own database.
No, exactly.
So,
yeah, I agree completely. And I also want to see the low level replication. How will it support entities with with overridden methods? I don't see that, but like low level tables would be very, very fun to see how that works, because it's a key driver for, like you say, high volume based. I mean, a lot of integration scenarios as well. You basically have what you had before, read-only replica of production database, where you can really build sustainable and high performance data flows. And I think that's really a fun thing to look at and see when it becomes GA and stable and tested.
Yeah, I really got a perspective on that today, because I listened to a podcast where there was a data scientist discussing different ways to surface data in SQL contra how we did it before, that we had SSIS projects and different SQL databases and so on. And one thing that I hadn't even reflected on was that one of the first things he said when he discussed Azure SQL was, it's crap. It's slow as hell. It has never been fast. There is no way you can get it fast unless you pay a whole lot of money. And I haven't even reflected on the fact that it isn't, because we have never had to deal with that, because it's a secondary database, so to speak. But their perspective was that I get more performance out of my laptop, my 10-year-old laptop, than I get from Azure SQL.
It's not built for that.
But then
exactly.
he purchased an standard one database, maybe.
Exactly, S1 tier. Exactly.
Or basic one.
But what he actually said, that even if you choose the high performance versions of Azure SQL, you still get better performance from your laptop with one single SSD drive than you get from Azure SQL. So in that perspective, I mean, normally if we look at an on-premise SQL server where you have like these PCI integrated direct storage disks, directly into the PCI bus, those are much faster. It doesn't even compare.
I think it was a good solution from Microsoft. It's a kind of a quick. It's called bring your own data warehouse. I don't think they swung that by the marketing department before they released it. To be honest, but I mean, it was a good thing because it solved a lot of issues, specifically for analysis. It makes my life a lot easier being able to write SQL queries directly to kind of find out issues and find out data. On that note, I had a colleague in a different project. He actually built a Power App to scale up and down the Azure Data Warehouse, so he could scale it up during nighttime when they ran all their chunks. Then he could scale it down during daytime to save cost for that client. So, really smart move and making use of what you have, right? So, but with that said, transitioning from BYOD and Azure SQL, it is very expensive. I run a lot of retail, high volume transactions. It's not cheap. So, if you can use a data lake for that, it's much better, of course. And that now they're catching up. So. But as you say, Paul, important to really see it in the field and see how it works before building with it. At least not now, but it's a very good step, I think. I think we don't want to run this too long. I have one question when it's you can rank it high or low, but what is your favorite feature in Dynamics? It can be anything from like a button or the favorite feature that you like the most with Dynamics 365.
I'm a techie and I like the most the whole ALM story behind F&O. So if you have set it up the right way, you do not have to care about deployments to dev test, deployments to pre-prod. You only have to press a button or simply completely automate it, and it runs.
Yeah.
So this is my favorite feature. Nice. And all the project management, resource scheduling thing behind Azure DevOps is also brilliant.
Super cool. Great.
Yep. All right. So I think we have to thank you for coming and join us today. And I just wanted to check if people are more curious in what you do during the days, where can they find information about you?
They can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and there they will find the my blog. It was a bit quiet on my blog because I did a lot of speaking at conferences, but I'm planning to catch up on this one.
Right, cool. Thanks for joining us.
Very nice. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, and to all our listeners, thanks for today, and bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.